How's it going, guys? And welcome to the Mastering in Depth class of Audio Dojo. Now, if you've watched the first two tutorials, you're in a good place for this. If you haven't, I would recommend watching them unless you're really just looking for a way to be able to master better, which is fine. But I'm really just trying to get you guys to watch my other videos. um, but aside from that, the main thing you have to remember for mastering, getting right to it, is to push to the limit while keeping dynamics as much as you possibly can. Now, what does that mean? That means that you don't want to... Mastering isn't just making the track loud. It's not just making it... just busting up the gain and putting a limiter on, just destroying the input gain on it and just annihilating it to make it louder. That's what normalizing is. Normalizing is pretty just making the entire track louder. But you need to make different elements louder relative to each other. It's not just the entire track louder. When you're mastering it, you want to make sure you can still hear it. It keeps its sonic integrity throughout the entire mix. You want to make sure all the things you work so hard doing in the mixing process, like EQing, cutting out stuff, and compressing and making stuff sound good dynamically with transients, you want it to still sound good after the mastering process. In fact, you want it to sound better by making it sound fuller and louder. Now, the main thing to remember, or the first thing to remember when it comes to mastering, is to prevent clipping at all motherfucking costs. Do not let it clip. Never. I will come to your house and I will brutally attack you if you do that. If you watch these tutorials and I still see you doing that, I will be deeply emotionally saddened. Do not do that to me. The best way to do this is obviously we're going to go to the master track and you want to limit it from clipping. So we use what is called a limiter, as you probably know. Now, you can set the threshold to 0. I know some people set thresholds to 0, some set it to negative 0.1. The ceiling is basically where you're going to stop the track. So I'm going to play it, and you're going to see on the master track it's actually not going to go all the way just because I don't want it to destroy your ears when I'm recording this. But again, I'm playing this last song that I used in the last tutorial, which was One Step Closer by Linkin Park. Off, I believe, Hybrid Theory. It might have been Meteor, though. So say... Sorry if that killed you a little bit. So you're seeing that it's going up. It's staying in a stable place. But if I were to push it all the way up and it started going over to 0, it would start becoming red on logic on this little area. And it would begin to clip. And you don't want it to clip. Again, because you don't want me coming to your house and attacking you. There's no need to use a limiter on individual tracks, because the limiter pretty much just glues everything together and brings everything up. If you use a limiter on individual tracks, there's going to be no room to really bring everything up, because your individual tracks are going to be so loud, it'll be clipping even before the mastering stage. Again, clipping is distortion that comes about as a result of the master track having too much input going into it. You can limit the track at either 0 decibels or negative 0.1. A lot of people have their own little tricks, and you'll learn that you might even find your own tricks that you can teach me. But this is good starting area for you to be going into the mastering process with. The second idea and step I think that would be best to teach you guys is that you complement each individual track by coloring the master track with either multiband compression, EQ. You can raise a little bit of the things as a group. You can you'll learn after practice and training your ear a bit. You'll learn that some people have the techniques they go to in the master track where you're kind of just cutting out a little bit, maybe the middle end, maybe boosting, compressing a little bit of the high end with a multiband compressor. You're just going to try to get the most out of the track, and coloring is really just another word for characterizing the sound and making it sound as good as you can get it. One thing to remember when you are complementing the tracks, individual tracks, is that subtler effects on the master track are better. When you're doing so much big changes on the individual tracks and doing more big changes on the master track, it might not always give you the best results. You kind of got to remember that when you're doing the master track, it's kind of just like makeup. You're kind of just putting on little touches to the master track just to make it look, quote unquote, really sound as best as it can sound. Multiband compression, I've learned, especially for starting out, but maybe even in general, it's better to do multiband compression on the mastering track. Um, personally, and I know a lot of people who would agree with me, wouldn't using just a normal compressor on the master track, because you want to be able to compress the master track in different ways, because there's so many elements going into it. Different frequencies being compressed is better than the entire thing just being compressed. You kind of overcomplicate things when you're multiband compression on the individual tracks. You'll learn, though, you are able to do it, and you can get some good effects with it. But definitely for starting out, I would recommend just using compression and the EQs just to really get a feel for how everything sounds. You should train your ear first. Again, and I mentioned this before in the last tutorial, do not adjust the fader for the master track. And I know I look like a hypocrite because it's way down, but that's for the sake of the tutorial. And again, not to annihilate and bombard your ears with Linkin Park, even though I like Linkin Park. The gain really replaces the master fader. If you just keep the master fader where it normally is by default, you can use the gain to get that extra little power before you start adding the fullness with the limiter and the compressor and the EQs. The limiter will keep it from clipping. I mean, it's a computer program. You can't really get past the limiter. So remember, it can still sound bad, though, even if you're limiting it. So remember to use the right effects limiting it. Don't do too much gain. Don't do too little. It's really, I would show you myself, but every track is different. And that's kind of the point and why audio engineering is interesting. Every track is different. So you have to sound what's good, learn and practice what sounds best for each individual tracks. And going off that, the final thought for mastering is to trust your ear. I know there probably have been mixes where people don't use a limiter, and it's clipping technically concerning the computer a little bit. It's clipping, but it still sounds good. So you have to, at the end of the day, learn the technical stuff that I'm teaching you. But if you want to say, yo, fuck you, Dexter, this sounds better, I'm completely for that. All right, this is just a good place to start, and you'll learn as you go around. You might get good results doing non-traditional ways of doing it. Not that there's really any traditional way of audio engineering completely, but just remember to trust your ear. That's the final thing. That should be not even just for this tutorial, but trust your ear for all these tutorials, because all audio engineering is your perception of what sounds best for the track. So that's all I can recommend. I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Let me know if you guys need any help with anything, and leave anything in the comments if you need. Thanks, you guys.